Hello, hello. Bom dia, or boa tarde, good afternoon, buenas tardes. I wish I knew that. Bonsoir, and whatever other languages we have here. Thank you all for being with us here in this conference and at this panel in specific. My name is Fernanda Santos. I am a Southwest Borderlands Professor of Practice at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at ASU. I'm also a contributing columnist with the Washington Post and I can proudly say now, a co-author of a musical based on the life story of an Arizona dreamer that's opening off-Broadway in March. So, and we will tell the story right. We just heard the news a few weeks ago, so I can now officially say it. So we are here. I'm very honored and excited to be covering this panel, organizing my sheets here so I don't lose anything. Engaging translation, questions of language and power in Arizona and beyond. And I will introduce you to the panelists, and I'll have some questions for them, but I really hope that you also have your own questions. So please listen, think of what you want to say, whatever they say here that you might want to follow up on. We would love to have your participation in this as well. So to my immediate right is Milagros Cisneros. She has been a federal public defender in Phoenix for over 15 years and recently spent 2 years as counsel to the Democratic members of the House Judiciary Committee. She's also a graduate of ASU School of Law. Then to Milagros' right is Mike Sullivan, longtime friend of mine, is the agency director of the Welcome to America Project, a Phoenix area nonprofit that provides services for newly arrived refugees. If you don't know anything about it, please look it up. It's a wonderful nonprofit. Mike began volunteering at the Welcome to America Project in 2008 and formally joined the team in 2017 after a successful career in biotech. Then to Mike's right is Lynette Faulkner. She's the principal of Valencia Newcomer School in the Alhambra School District, a school that serves the Phoenix area's newest arrivals. And the school focuses on linguistic, academic, and social emotional skills to prepare students to continue at their local school districts. Lynette has been a teacher and an administrator in elementary and junior high school education for over 20 years, and she has raised her family in the Alhambra School District. Then to my left is Stephanie Fitzgerald. She's an associate professor and the director of the American Indian Studies program here at Arizona State. Her research is situated at the intersection of print and material cultures, land and language-based pedagogies, and customary and federal Indian law and policy. Previously, she taught at the University of Kansas, and she's a Cree tribal member. Then to Stephanie's left is Rodney Hero, a professor and the Raul Yzaguirre Chair in the School of Politics and Global Studies at ASU. His research and teaching focus are on American democracy and politics, especially as viewed through the analytical lenses of Latino politics, racial ethnic politics, state and urban politics, and federalism. Prior to coming to ASU, he taught at UC Berkeley, the University of Notre Dame, the University of Colorado at Boulder, and the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs. So we have a lot of people who know a lot of things about very interconnected but different aspects of the idea of language and how it's used and its importance and the power of it, or lack thereof. So I want to start with this. I was thinking about how am I going to open this to kind of frame this right. And I went back to an essay that I wrote for Guernica magazine. It's a literary magazine some years ago, where I talked about how this idea of language became weaponized. I was very curious about when did language become a weapon in Arizona. And it turns out that it was before even Arizona was a state. I spoke with Dr. Christine Marin, who's an emerita professor here at ASU. And Christine has many, many, many stories to tell and lots of knowledge. And she told me this story about the U.S. Army soldiers that came into central Arizona in the Yavapai Indian region and started fighting with them, of course, over their land that they had occupied since time immemorial. And the Army was a new arrival. They were coming into a place where others were already established, and Arizona was still a United States territory, and it was during these territorial years that language started being used to carve out differences. So the soldiers and the settlers who came after them, who were white, described Native Americans, used the words hostile, enemy, always on a rampage, to describe the Native Americans, the indigenous people that they encountered when they got here. So this idea of language as a weapon, both in the way the words that we use, but also the languages that we speak or are not allowed to speak sometimes, has been shaping minds and political persuasions in Arizona since the beginning of time, right? And this is a state where lines of racial and ethnic demarcation are clearly defined, even as they're challenged by shifting demographics and politics here. So I was just telling them that as I was writing this, I thought, no one better than Mike Sullivan to start us out by talking about the work that he does and a very unique experience that he has. So Mike, can you tell us here about Arizona's history as a recipient of refugees, and also what you've seen in these many years that you've been at the Welcome to America project, working with refugees who are newly arrived in this country and also this state?
Keribu, merhaba, bienvenido, salam alaikum, jambo, bite. A lot of different ways to say welcome. I don't know many words beyond that, but you'd be surprised how a single word can open up a door and relax a setting and begin a relationship. Just a way of saying, I see you, I know who you are. So we welcome refugee families, resettle refugee families shortly upon arrival, and help to resource them for the things they might need. Can you imagine going someplace with just the clothes on your back, or with a single suitcase at best, and having to build over with everything, need to be self-sufficient within 3 to 6 months? So that's real life for a refugee. And no matter what we put in the truck, the real stuff are the people that come out and say, we're glad you're here, we're glad you're safe. That make that, they'll remember us for a lifetime. I share with folks that what we try to do is turn fear into hope. And almost everybody that I say that to thinks about refugee fear. But it's also the community's fear of others, of people that sound different, that eat different foods, that dress differently, the exact same way the refugees would describe the people, us, that are there to greet them. So specifically, there's about 85,000 refugees have been settled over the last 20 years into Phoenix, and from 30 plus countries. And I remind you that those from those countries usually weren't the ones that drew the lines, right? They're colonials that drew the lines. So I say countries, but that's our way of defining it, right? There's a lot of different cultures and peoples and tribes and from those places. The other thing I wanted to point out too is that you'll hear a lot of labels. You'll hear asylum seekers, you'll hear asylees, you'll hear refugees. Now you hear words like humanitarian parolee and special immigration visa and all this kind of stuff. Guess what? All of those categories contain people, right? So that's the first focus for what we do. Refugees, they really are simply resettled. So what we try to do is help them to more fully integrate and find faster self-sufficiency. And that's where the resourcing, things like computers, look for a job, or bikes to find ways to work, clothes so that they have a change of clothes for the kids at school, or when it's time to go for an interview. And then one of the things you had asked about was just kind of observation. So I just want to throw this one thing out. we use the word integration often, and then we behave in ways that reinforce assimilation. And the point I'm making is that when two people come together, they're two others, not one other. And I know it's important that refugees learn when they resettle here, they have to learn laws and language and workplace norms and customs and things like that. But what we try to do is create encounters so that integration becomes interaction, right? It's not one group that's been assigned to be exactly like the other group. We encourage people to celebrate their cultures, celebrate their language, celebrate their traditions, their religions, their experiences, their occupations, all those sort of things. So that's one of the things that I see, even people that are involved in the business, if you want to call it that, of integration sometimes get caught up in, I don't know if assimilatory is a word, but if it is, I just made it up.
It's okay to make up words.
Yeah.
That's how language evolves.
So, right, all words are made up.
Right.
Yeah. So, but anyway, that's just one of the things that I wanted to turn fear into hope. That's everybody's fear. And then the other part is that integration is interaction.
So I think that's actually a perfect segue to bring Lynette into this conversation, right? So you teach at a school where students are newcomers. They come from all over the world, all these 30-some countries that Mike mentioned, and more, because, they don't have to be just 30-some, right? People can come in other ways and need that sort of introduction into this country. And so it's a two-part question, Lynette. One is, how do you teach these kids who are exclusively non-native English speakers in a state that is the only state in the country that still has an English-only law?
Thank you first, Mike. I want to say before I answer that we have a strong partnership with Welcome to America, and when our families come and they enroll at our school, we automatically ask them, what do you need? And what can we do to help you? And how can we support you? And through that process, we then reach out to Welcome to America project, and then our teachers help support, and our staff help support with that delivery process. So thank you so much, Mike, for all that you do for our children and our families. So for me personally, being in the classroom for over 20 years and an administrative role for 5 years in America, in Arizona, my desire has always been to support our English language learners. We all know that Proposition 203 is out there, requiring students who are English language learners to be taught in English immersion classes. I'm a rule follower, I'll tell you that, and I will do what is asked of me. However, this doesn't allow for our particular students to make those connections between our home language and the English during instruction, in my opinion. So at Valencia, we serve students from 13 different countries at this point who come with a variety of languages. We started with hiring the perfect fit, and that's how we start for the population that we serve. We also provide a safe environment. We call it a soft landing at our school. Everyone who is a part of our Valencia family, staff members, all the way across the board, they have to align with our mission and our vision. And that is to provide a strong academic foundation for our students, as well as supporting them as they transition into the American school system. I hire staff that speak a multitude of languages to support with clarifying situations, as well as parent support, and provide an environment where students can see connections to their home countries, a garden, multiple flags, murals that represent who they are, celebrating cultures, bringing the families in to volunteer at our school. Once I've provided that safe environment, a place where they feel safe that they can then begin to learn, education then becomes existent. Our staff are all trauma trained. Our teachers are SEI, Structured English Immersion certified, which allows for them to provide a variety of techniques to teach our English language learners. Our students are progress monitored every 15 days to make sure that we know that we are meeting their individual needs. Our parents become part of the learning process as we provide monthly meetings in a variety of languages to teach them what is happening in the classrooms and to help them find their voice as a parent in the American school system. We provide a variety of wraparound services for our children and our family so that when they do need something, we have what we need to give them. That includes our social worker, who is very adverse in making sure that she supports them. We provide restorative practices. I have an intervention behaviorist. Many of our children that come from other countries and they get put into the American school system without understanding the what, the who, the why, end up in the detention room on a regular basis because they don't understand. So we provide the restorative practice approach. Our kids do not get in trouble for things they don't know. We provide a learning environment that is safe for them to then move into learning education. We don't just go in teaching curriculum right away. We take a moment to just make sure they know that they are in a safe environment, that their parents are safe, that they have a voice, and we celebrate who they are. And through that process, education then starts to happen. When they feel safe, when the parents are good, and home is good, then the children then can begin to learn English. So it seems like a long process. We have our students for 1 year, and the first part of that year is honestly just learning how to be in school and the expectations and celebrating who they are. And then through that process, they begin to learn English as a common language with each other, with our skilled staff that are certified to and have the ability to be able to teach them the English language.
So I love how you talked about teaching them, and clearly it's a very necessary work. It's what will allow them to integrate here, to find jobs, in the case of their parents, and the kids to find friends, make friends with others, not necessarily just English speakers, right? But you talked about this common language. But I'm curious, and then I'll jump right to Milagros, but I have a quick follow-up, which is you teach them so much, but can you tell us one or two things that they have taught you?
The list could be forever long with what they teach, what I have learned from our children. Can I offer 6 quickly?
Yes,
if I go
6,
fast?
Yes.
6 out of the hundreds of things that I have learned. The things that our children have taught us, that our parents have taught us, is that education is valued. That's one of the first things that when they enroll again, our families ask us, how much do we have to pay you? And when I tell them it's free, there are many tears, and they're just so thankful that education is something that is offered to their children, and they're so thrilled. So we, again, bring our parents as partners so that they understand what is going on in the school system as well, and that just educates them to another level too. So education is definitely valued, and they make sure that if there are any, there aren't many, but if there are a few discipline problems, because they're still kids, right? After they learn what to do and what not to do and try to push it, the discipline, there is none, truly, because our parents are saying, we have a gift here, so, and we need to take advantage of that gift. So education is valued. My second thing that I've learned is that family and community are important to all of our families. So really trying to connect them with people in the community that can help support, I've seen is something I've really learned, and I wish more people would take that village mentality that it takes all of us, and they believe, the families that we interact with believe that everyone has the responsibility to support our children, not just the parents, but that it is a community. Stop taking things for granted. The little things mean so much to our families and our children. They don't care if they have new clothes on, they just care that they're in school, and that, if we offer a pair of shoes, they're thankful, but that's not important. What's important is their education and the things that we have to offer for their families to be successful. I've learned resiliency from our children. The stories in the family, the stories that I hear, every child that walks on our campus has a story. They have something that they've come from, and the resiliency that I can't even begin to imagine. the things that our children have seen and the things that they have experienced, and for them to still be positive and say, there's hope. There's hope. We are here, and there's hope for my parents, and there's hope for us. So I think resiliency. And then the last thing what I would say that I've learned is that everyone has something to contribute. Everyone is special. Our children are in a classroom where they all do not speak the same language, but yet they're teaching each other. I have Swahili speakers that are speaking Spanish. I have Spanish speakers that are speaking Swahili. In the mornings before instruction begins, they're out in the courtyard teaching each other dances and games that they've learned from their home countries. Our children and our families have learned that each person, each individual has a special gift that they can share with them, regardless of what they look like, regardless of where they've come from, because we've all come to that Valencia with a story, with a journey.
Well, thank you so much. And obviously, a happy place, a place of hope, right? But Milagros knows the beautiful side of things, but also the really sad side of things, right? Working as a federal public defender, dealing with all the legal challenges, but cultural challenges, linguistic challenges. So, work in the courts, what role does language inclusion or exclusion play in allowing access to rights, legal guidance, and understanding of the process? And also, how does that lack of understanding impacts the legal process itself? For example, if it's an immigrant, in removal proceedings. I know you're not an immigration lawyer, but you understand what I'm trying to. Yeah. But so essentially, how does language? What role does it play in inclusion and exclusion in the courts?
And thank you for what you said. I felt very inspired by what you said. And thank you for having me here this afternoon. My experience is somewhat limited. I can't really speak for the courts more broadly in Arizona. I practice only in federal court, and that has been almost exclusively where I have practiced, and also almost exclusively in the Federal Public Defender Office, where I've been for, it'll be almost 20 years at this point. To your question, the Sixth Amendment to the United States Constitution is an effort to ensure that defendants in criminal cases are provided with effective representation. It also confers a right on a person to confront the witnesses against them, to be able to assist their attorneys, and to be present in the proceedings against them from start to finish. Now, that concept of presence is what I really take or try to take with me whenever I meet with somebody who does not speak English. It's not having these protections amount to a due process violation and a serious problems for us in the courts. If we do not ensure that the people who appear before the court are present. And to your question, so language inclusion is absolutely critical for a defendant to be present in the proceedings against them. And it's not just access to interpretation, it's also meaningful access. We're not just talking about, we're just speaking Spanish to you. You really need to understand what's going on. A lot of times we don't do that because the courts have a problem with that in general, in English too. Legalese in English is legalese in Spanish. And if you're interpreting word for word, then that's what you get. So that's a problem and an issue for us in court in general, in terms of sort of people, not just non-English speakers, being present in the proceedings against them. Now, it was almost 45 years ago that Congress passed the federal, I think it's called the Court Interpreters Act, which finally saw the light and made it a statute that required interpretation in the courts for individuals who are limited English proficient people. Now, this requires interpretation in all criminal cases and in civil cases where the United States is a party, so for instance, an immigration court. And it also requires that certified interpreters be used whenever it's possible. Now, a number of you are probably certified, federally certified interpreters. So you are well familiar with how difficult and rigorous the examination process is and the need to continue to stay apprised in interpretation in general. Now, currently, the only language I believe that has that level of rigor is Spanish. It used to be that you could also get certified in Haitian Creole and Navajo, but I think that that's no longer the case right now. But in relation to what we see here in Arizona, specifically in Phoenix, I can tell you, for instance, some statistics. In fiscal year 2020, we had 821 immigration offenses out of a total of 1,290 in federal court. So it is a significant number of people that require the services of an interpreter. Now, in federal court in Arizona, we also have individuals who speak Navajo, Apache. Those interpreters are relatively easily provided, but if you're talking about Mixteco Alto, Mixteco Bajo, Zapoteco, that really gets pretty complicated. And not only does it require identifying the specific place where the individual comes from, the particular village, because that could be Mixteco Alto and Mixteco Bajo are completely different, even though they're Mixteco. But then there's a problem also because we have to do a three-way translation. So it's the judge speaking in English, the lawyer, the judge speaking in English, gets translated into Spanish. Spanish goes to the particular indigenous language. And as you can imagine, during COVID, that's even more complicated because the defendants, at least in federal court, are not appearing in person. They're appearing via either video teleconference or by telephone. So it's a serious problem. So enter the lawyer, right? So enter a person like me, for instance. We are trying to assess and ensure that our clients are present, and we have to assess it on a number of levels. We don't know if perhaps the failure to understand has to do with any number of things. It's not just language, it's culture, it's mental health, it's substance use, it's trauma, it's COVID, it's technology, right? So those are the challenges that we have. And for me or for the lawyers that I work with, and I also supervise the interpreters in our office, we have 5 interpreters, federally certified interpreters in our office who work with our lawyers and try to the best of their ability to ensure that our defendants, our clients are as present as they can be in the hearings that they're going through. In response to your question, it can't be more important. Language and the ability to bridge those gaps cannot be more important. And I am very fortunate to work with a group of interpreters who not only are good insofar as the language, but also in terms of the cultural aspects, in terms of sort of figuring out, well, does this person have an educational barrier? Do they have a cognitive barrier sometimes too? Or simply, do they have a mental health issue? So those are the challenges that we go through day in and day out in federal court. But bringing it back, the main, if I were to say communicate one main concept to you all, is this notion of ensuring that the person is present in the proceedings against them.
It's funny because you talk about being present, and I keep thinking of all the times I talk to my daughter who's 12, and I tell her to put the phone away because she needs to be present. You know, it's so important because we so much is lost if we're there but not paying attention, right? But I want to kind of talk about a different kind of language usage and acquisition, bring Stephanie into the conversation, because there are the interpreters who are highly qualified and knowledgeable in whatever language they're interpreting, right? And then there are the heritage speakers sometimes, or just, we can talk about them and you can talk about others, but I think of heritage speakers because my daughter speaks Portuguese at home. So I taught her, she's semi-literate. And so I makes me think about the work that you do in your department, you and your professors do in offering instruction in Navajo and O'odham languages at the college level to Native Americans.
Yes. Hello?
It's on.
Thank you. Thank you, Fernanda. I'd like to preface my remarks by noting a number of fairly major structural events that have impacted the familial and community transmission of native languages in the United States. The reasons why our students don't speak their native languages already. And some of those I'll focus on two. The first one is the federal Indian school system that disrupted transmission of languages. Students were required to only speak English, and there was severe corporal punishment for speaking native languages. The second is the Indian Relocation Act of 1956, which moved Indian families and individuals from their reservations and from traditional lands into major urban areas. That was a significant disruption to transmission of language. So our students that we serve in the American Indian Studies program are third, fourth, fifth generation of those disruptions. So they come to us, and fairly generally speaking, native languages are not taught in public K through 12 classrooms. So they come to us and we offer the Navajo language and the O'odham language from beginning level to advanced level. So they have the opportunity to take 4-level classes from beginning to advanced and become fairly competent at the end of that. We're very proud that we're able to offer these classes. They're one of the cornerstones of our program, along with sovereignty in the courts and federal Indian law and other cultural offerings that we have. It is one of the cornerstones of our program, and it makes us stand apart from many of the other programs across the U.S. that aren't able to offer native languages. So basically, that it's very important that we're able to offer these languages in our program.
If I can ask
Yes,
I gotta turn myself on here. If I can ask a quick follow-up.
of course.
I keep thinking of this idea of the privilege that my daughter had to, obviously, born in my home, lives with me, always spoke Portuguese to her. It's not just the language, the culture she's exposed to. In the process of language acquisition, when you come from, as you said, third to fifth generation removed from all this trauma that the families endured, what is the sort of, I'm thinking about the emotional impact of allowing that, because it's not just it's not just something you learn, it's much more significant than that. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it can be very emotional. It's a very emotional connection to learn one's language. I am not a language instructor myself, so I can't speak to that. But it's immensely rewarding, and it provides this emotional connection, and just, it's beyond words, I think, to be able to recapture something that was not available previously.
Okay. Well, I want to bring in Rodney to the conversation. We were. It's our electrical connection here. Let me see.
It says me or you.
I don't know. Maybe we can use one microphone here. Yeah. Okay. I think it's because I don't know. Who knows why? But anyway, we were chatting before this, and I had one plan to ask something of Rodney, but then he mentioned this recent work that he's been doing, which is fascinating, around the language that past presidents of the United States have used to communicate issues of equality and inclusion. Again, it's thinking about the idea of the words that we use, how they have not just the power goes much beyond. There's the emotional connection. There is the idea of inclusion and being not assimilation, but integration, right? But then there is also the horrible ways that language is used sometimes to separate people. And I'm not saying that all presidents do that with language or did that, but I'll let you talk about it because you're the expert here.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a real honor to be on this stage with everyone and to be speaking to you, so thank you very much. I want to tell you a little bit quickly about some research I'm involved in that I hope is some interest to you and not overly abstract or whatever. I sometimes am, quote, too professorial in the best or worst sense of that word.
He told me I can stop him if he
So what
talks
I'd
too
like
much.
to do, is, as Fernanda suggested, is just to tell you a little bit about one project I'm working on that, again, tries to focus upon some of the major ideas, values, beliefs in American politics and society. I'm involved in a project where we are trying to ascertain and study carefully how often concerns about equality are manifested in presidential State of the Union addresses, as well as in their inaugurals and so on. My colleagues and I, a number of years ago, thought, well, you know, the notion of equality is presumably at the forefront of American values, or foundational even. Our argument is that it is foundational, but it's really not at the forefront of the discussions of presidential State of the Union addresses. So what we have done is done careful content analysis going back to 1960 up until recent years, and tried to do things like count the number of words and where these words are and so on, and the extent to which there is reference to equality, and even more important, we think, or at least to think about, is inequality, and how those words are there and whether or not they are juxtaposed to each other in certain ways.
Can you give us a couple of examples of some words?
Yeah, I was going to just now. Yeah, so we do look for the word equality per se, and it's stunning how little it appears in presidential State of the Union addresses. The word inequality, I think we found one time over that 50, 60-year period. Obama mentioned it one time. And he didn't mention it with regard to race. He really mentioned it with regard to economic inequality or class inequality. So one of our focus has been, to what extent do they talk about equality or inequality, but also do they talk about it in racial or economic class terms? And one of the things we find that to the extent they talk about both in a particular address, they're very separated within the context of that of the State of the Union address. So they might mention something about class early on, and then much later they'll mention something about race. But they're not connected. And our argument, and I think many people's argument, would be we need to understand these in relationship to each other, at least potentially within a relationship to each other. We also juxtapose words like equality, or look for words like equality, inequality, and so on, and other words like justice, which you hear with some frequency. But our sense is, justice is a very important concept, to be sure. But it's not the same as equality or inequality. So there's kind of, in our sense, kind of an avoidance, if you will, of certain important values in American politics and society. So let me very quickly, and one of the things we do as well is try and juxtapose it to other words. So if a president does say something about equality or inequality, it's interesting how frequently they will then say something like related to individualism. Well, we want to help people, et cetera, but they have to earn it. They need, they need to show us that they're deserving. And it's striking how much that is done by presidents across the board, but perhaps more Democratic presidents than Republican presidents. And our sense is because to the extent they talk about equality, they have to kind of, quote, cover themselves because of the understanding or interpretation of those two sets of ideas in American politics. So again, in our analysis, we look for words about equality, inequality, class, race, and so on. And just very quickly, what we look for are the following. We talk about words that are used. The words we look for are the presence of those words, their presence, their position, where they appear within the State of the Union addresses, the portrayal of certain values, how those are framed and talked about, the period, how that differs over time, and finally we look at political party, different presidents of different political parties, and we're trying to develop a systematic analysis of that. But in many ways, what we end up being most struck by, and this kind of led us to study it in the first place, is how infrequently those ideas of equality are directly and are really at the forefront of presidents' discussions. Now, we've been told, well, sure, presidents talk about lots and lots of things. That's fair, that's correct. But we're trying to look at certain kinds of values, how much in relationship to each other, and what that tells us about the evolution of American values and beliefs and so on. And again, we leave, or where we are currently in our analysis and where we leave, is that, why and how is this the case? And does it manifest itself in other venues like inaugural addresses, political party platforms? And so our argument is that they don't talk about it much, but that's important because of what you don't talk about may be almost as important about what you do talk about it. And when they do talk about it, they talk about it in certain kinds of ways, which our view kind of diminishes the potential significance.
That has my mind going in so many different places right now, because we heard from Lynette and Mike and Milagros and Stephanie about the importance of language to equality, right? To inclusion, to understanding, presence. But then we hear that in our own political leaders, presidents, in English. So we're not even asking them to try other languages, right? The use of language often communicates the opposite. Even the idea of equality is communicated by, but you have to put in the work. And then I started thinking to myself, and maybe, maybe if everybody could talk a little bit about that, and then we can open up to questions. How does that sound? But I'm interested in finding out how difficult or how challenging is it to do the work that you do when you are faced with, when you're doing it in a world, in a country where the language that we use is so divisive, and the idea of equality has become also almost like it has been politicized so heavily that it becomes very difficult to talk about it without getting in a fight. At least that's, I love to fight with people, verbally, of course, who have very different ideas about equality than I do. But anyway, I'll start with you, Lynette. I'm gonna pass on the mic because, you have one there? Okay, let's see if that is gonna, I think it's gonna work. I'm gonna hand this to you. Sure.
Wow. I'm also honored to be up here. This is pretty fascinating. I think for us, I was on the committee when we first started researching newcomer schools. When we looked across the United States, there weren't very many. And so we did create a task force and went out and were all sent to different ones that were across the country and just immersed ourselves in those schools and then brought back information to help create Valencia. And one of the things that concerned us in our district was the fact that we were going to be serving the population that we serve, refugee, immigrant status students. And we knew we had to do it because of the data that showed that these students were not progressing in the American school system in our district. We knew that their language development was not happening in the American schools, the school system that we were putting our students in. And we tried to figure out how we could do this without causing, I don't even know the word, to understand that this is okay, that these children are a part of our communities, that these families are a part of who we are as a society, and we just need to give them the tools to share their voice and share their gifts in our communities. So the concern at first was, especially with partnerships, I'm very strong in bringing partnerships in to help support our school. A lot of partnerships did not want to be a part of us because they didn't have the same vision. They have a misconception regarding refugees. They have a misconception regarding our newcomers and what they bring to the table and why they're in this country in the first place, and going through all of that political piece of it. And that not understanding the process that they brought, that they come to our country and that they do belong here. So we had to work through a lot of that to make sure that we felt accepted, that our school felt accepted, that our students and our community felt accepted. And the more that we went out and shared our children with our community, and the more we got our parents out there in the workforce, we started gaining partnerships and started gaining understanding. So I really think that there's a misconception. The power of language is so strong out there, and understanding who our children and who our families are and what they bring to the table. Once we started sharing that information out, it seemed to change, and we are super excited to be a part of the Phoenix area and be able to share our students with our communities. Answered your question.
No, it did. Let me grab this for a second. Sorry, Milagros. I want to focus, Mike, your comments, and if I may, yours as well. If you could talk about, especially recently, right? We're getting a lot of not refugees, special visa people from Afghanistan. They're given a special visa to come here, and we've had this conversation how 20 years ago, when the first wave of Afghans arrived here, it was really different. The initial treatment they got, and you said that you're seeing some change now. Can you kind of focus around this idea of the change and how it has happened, and then I'll move on to Milagros later.
Gotcha.
I'll let him talk.
Okay, I'm going to cheat and just say one thing related to what Lynette said.
You're
What
allowed.
I see is language is judgment, is English is the standard. And so the question is not how many languages they speak. The first question is, do they speak English, right? So my favorite answer is, they speak 6 or 7 languages, but I can't remember if English is one of them, right? Take that, because, so that's one of the other things. And then the other thing that, kind of relates to that can be humbling for somebody who's spoken English their whole life is when they're trying to relay something and, the message is where there's not really an English word for it. Like, you and your cool language over there, you don't even have a word for what I'm trying to convey right there. So I think that's pretty powerful. But so Afghan and receptivity. So 20 years ago, the very first person we welcomed was from Afghan. Very quick history is that the founders, Phil Manning lost his brother Terrence in the Twin Towers. read about a family from Afghanistan in the newspaper that was being treated like they were in on the plot, even though they had fled Afghanistan, fled the Taliban themselves. Phil's family went out, greeted the family, made them feel welcome, realized they needed some things, and then began the process of asking the community to help refugees. Well, so much came in, we had to find other families, and it kept coming in, and we've kept finding families for 20 years. So that's the history. But guess what? Today, 20 years later, it's a lot more popular to welcome an Afghan family than it was before. I think the closest parallel that I can share is, so 20 years ago, Afghan refugees were being treated like terrorists. 20 years ago, Afghan refugees were being treated like the people at our borders are treated now, right? And so, you can look, and it all has to do with like policy. And I tell people, the only difference between us and refugees, there's only one difference. You know what that is? Circumstance. No matter what you do for fun, no matter what you do for occupation, no matter what your family set up, I can tell you about a refugee that's exactly like that, but they have different circumstances. And so that's one of the things, and to try to contemplate, well, what exactly happened to make Afghan refugee support cool, where with going on at the other side of the border is not so cool. And these aren't my judgments. I'm kind of just relaying sentiments that you'll see. That's a tough one to comprehend.
And I'll let Milagros talk. I won't even. I know you're like. I can feel like you're like jumping off your chair. Want to say something? So go ahead.
I'm a trial lawyer. And as a trial lawyer, I have to look at a case as a possible trial. Every single case, every single defendant is potentially going to trial. So what do we do in order to decide whether we go to trial? Are we going to get a fair jury? That is a big, big question for us. So to the extent that political events and rhetoric inflame certain aspects of public sentiment, they definitely trickle down to our juries. And so in some instances, we may make a decision depending on the defendant's circumstances, their particular characteristics, unfortunately, that even if a defendant has a good case, we would not be able to get a fair jury. And so you've got that issue. We also, in the event that we go to trial anyway, right? There are ways of structuring questions to attempt to get at bias, right? At juror bias. But it's an ongoing problem and continues to be a problem for us. One other example I have that has to do with specifically here in Phoenix, in federal court, we used to try cases in Prescott, and there was a very beautiful courthouse there that was an old post office. And the reason why we tried the cases in Prescott was because that was closer for individuals from northern Arizona to come to Prescott for the trial. A northern Arizona jury is much more diverse, including Navajo, Apache, et cetera, folks who it might be a more representative jury in relation to the defendant. That courthouse in Prescott closed. They're building another courthouse in Flagstaff, hopefully to address that issue. But one of the things that the court would do in order to obtain that more diverse jury was they would bring people down from Prescott. If you insisted on a Prescott jury, and I, in Phoenix, tried cases where I insisted on a Prescott jury, the Prescott jury would be brought down to Phoenix and to ensure a greater diversity in relation to what a northern Arizona population might be. So, we're constantly trying to figure out how to address these issues, but sometimes we just have to make a call that it's in the best interest of the defendant to take a deal because we don't think we're going to get a fair shot.
Wow,
Depressing.
let's all sit with that for a moment, right? Because anyway, I could be talking to you all forever, but I really would love to take some questions from our audience. Anyone have any? Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. It didn't look that way. Do you want to?
I have a really loud voice.
Are you a teacher?
I'm an interpreter.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
My name is Janice Palma. I am the chair of the board of the National Association of Judiciary Interpreters and Translators. I've been interpreting for 40 years before Mike's, so I learned to project. We have been working with attorneys, and the question goes for the federal public defender. And we are concerned that sometimes the attorneys just want to get the LEPs out of the way. And in my personal case, I am very concerned about the fact that sometimes the LEPs get through the system very quickly to get them out, especially for misdemeanors and the
Yes.
minor felonies, without them really knowing what's going on,
I agree with you completely.
even though they have the federally certified interpreters with them.
Yes.
So what is, give me some feedback from the federal public defenders. How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel that that's very wrong, obviously, and I kind of geared my comments toward the notion of presence, right, and how it's so important to make sure that our clients are present. But I absolutely agree with you. Let's talk about Operation Streamline, right? 12,000 people getting processed basically in Tucson through the federal courts, and going really fast. And it's impossible to ensure anything close to due process really there. One example, for instance, is we have cases in which you'll have a defendant who went through Operation Streamline in Tucson, gets arrested here in Phoenix. Turns out they speak Zapoteco, right? They never really understood, and then what does the U.S. Attorney's Office say? Well, he had court in Tucson 3 times where he was given interpretation in English, right? So how can you be arguing now that you need a Zapoteco interpreter when, So it's a matter of resources, and I agree completely with you. This is why we try very hard to work on best practices in our office with our interpreters. I think I mentioned that I supervise interpreters in my office, and one of the things that we really, really rely on them to do for us is to make that connection and to make sure it's not only a language issue, right? It's not only a language issue. It's cultural. It's figuring out any number of problems that could be going on for this person. And I will tell you that, at least from my perspective, and the perspective of the Federal Public Defender's Office here in Phoenix, we are very, very, very committed to ensuring the presence of our clients in court and in their meetings with us.
Do we have more questions? Yes, there's a question here. Nina is bringing a microphone for you.
Thank you. My name is Manuel de Jesus Hernandez. I've been here 25 years at ASU, and we have a Mexican-American Studies program in Spanish where we prepare doctorates and MAs, and we help the BAs master some Spanish so they can go out and get some jobs. And I kept track of Proposition 203. I also was an activist. I also have helped the Guatemalan Americans migrate. They were going from $5,000 to going to close to $100,000. And I always tell them, you have to organize centers where you will be teaching English, Maya, and Spanish. And I work with them. So, but here's my question. In listening to what you're doing, there's another factor, and so, of course, within Mexican-American, the history of going back to 1848 and the Treaty of Hidalgo and being able to use Spanish. Then going back to the rebirth of Spanish in the 60s, where after the Cubans came in, and then the Puerto Ricans also wanted bilingual education, the Bilingual Education Act, and Mexican Americans also wanted it. But then what happened, and then I'm going to here know that my question to center it before I go forward is that what about they have values, the immigrants, the refugees have values. What about keeping them later? Because this is what happened. When bilingual education was enacted, the federal government used to give millions of dollars, and then they started cutting back. It had to do with a movement that happened in Miami, Florida. And the person that went against, pushed for English only was a Russian immigrant, and saying, we want to speak English here. This is where I came here. And that's what led to it. And then eventually, the movement against bilingual education spread throughout the whole country. And then here we got 203 with that guy from computers from the Bay Area who invested a lot of money to do it. And then right now, what's going on right now with the critical race theory, which goes back to repressing Mexican American studies in Tucson, because now they're applying it to black studies and other ethnic studies, that the person who's leading that movement right now is also an immigrant. And she has a website with 38,000 followers. So if you go back to it, if you continue repressing not only bilingual education, but Spanish, and you also repress ethnic studies programs, and eventually that could also affect. So my question is also, yes, we are, and I have worked for decades with refugees and immigrants and so on. When I was studying Spanish at the age of 13, there were only about 5-6 million Hispanics, Latinos, and today there's 61, 67 million. So I've been working with their Spanish. So, but I'm just worrying about whether those values that you practice, that I practice, also the ex-refugees eventually become ex-refugees and ex-immigrants, if they also, you emphasize that they should also practice them for the rest of their lives.
Okay, who wants to take that one?
I'm going to start there. One of the things that we make sure we tell our teachers is not to forget about who our children are. They are required to do research on all the children, their background, all the countries that they come from, everything that entails who they are as a person, so that they can integrate it into their classrooms. So you can walk into our classroom and you will see, I'm just going to use an example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to 10, and then you will see it in French, and you will see it in Spanish, and you will see it in Swahili, all the way across, and that happens throughout the whole classroom to help support with those connections. We make sure that that our children never lose who they are. They are who they are. We're not pushing any westernized society on them. We are showing what it is to be in an American school, the rules and procedures that you have to follow, but that is all, other than learning the English language. Their culture is strong and is celebrated, and their parents come to the parent meetings, and we celebrate them and the cultures that they possess, or that are part of who they are. So and then our transition plan, when they transition into their home schools, is that we meet with the principals and the teachers to continue that process. So we hope and we do our best to make sure that they never lose who they are and who their family represents. So I know that.
And I want to add a quick something, and it's not really, I came here to moderate and ask questions, but I think that what you talked about and your question is coming from this very idea of how we define American, right? There has been historically an acceptance that there is the mainstream is something, and though people of color, is one of the terms that's used these days, they don't fall within the mainstream, generally speaking. The definition of American is the English speaker, is what Mike said. It's do they speak English? Because that is part of. In fact, there was a poll recently that polled both people who identified as Republicans and Democrats, and one of the questions was. Public Research Religion Institute, I believe that's where it came from. But one of the questions was, what are the characteristics that people need to be defined as American? And on both sides of the aisle, I was surprised to see so many Democrats, just by the assumption the Democrats are more open-minded when it comes to this. almost half of all Democrats and more than half of Republicans said that speaking English is part of your definition of becoming American. So, that really hurt me because I think the idea of country is much bigger than that. But I just wanted to add that I think that we have been conditioned for so long, even those of us immigrants, as I am, refugees and so forth, historically conditioned to accept the definition of American, to fit into the definition, because who wants to get into a new country and not fit in, right? That forces you to operate under the premise that you're only American if you can speak English and speak English well. A lot of times, even people with accents, they feel badly because, their English is perfect, but they have an accent. So I just wanted to add that because I think that's a really sort of, it's going back to language, right? The way we use the words, how we define this accepted definition of words that we use, American, mainstream, immigrant, carries so much weight in how we behave in a country. So anyway.
Right, just one comment. So I get you. So we go out, we welcome families, right? We put a premium on refugees, welcoming refugees. We like to have other people come back. One of my favorite parts of the day is when, there's family we're welcoming, and then there's all the volunteers, there may be 30 people there, and I'll ask, hey, put your hand up if you arrived as a refugee, leave it up. Put your hand up if you were not born in the United States. Put your hand up if your parents weren't born in the United States. And it is an overwhelming number of hands. And then I say, and by the way, real quickly, say welcome in a language that's not English. So there might be 15 different ways that people say welcome. It's a way for them to realize, first of all, you don't have to stay with your own. Look at all this blend of people that are here to welcome you. And the second part of it, you get to keep your culture. Everybody knows the language, and they know a lot more words and a lot more customs than that. So I'm with you.
How much time have we got left? We have a question here. We have about 10 minutes? We're good? Okay.
Well, I'll try not to ask too long a question then. My question is just similar to follow up on that. My name, by the way, is John Caleb Collins, alumnus of ASU, and I'm an Episcopal priest in Cochise County, serving along the border. And actually, my question relates to the speakers of indigenous languages, Native Americans in the United States, but from the indigenous Americas more often. Such a breadth of knowledge on this panel. Is there any insider information as to what is being done by NGOs or advocates, or even within the government sectors themselves, to educate people about the fact that many indigenous languages are spoken, including in in Mexico and other parts of the Americas? Because one thing I hear a lot in Cochise County is the people, this was never their country. But when you point out the migratory patterns that indigenous people have always seen this land differently and not with the borders that are imposed on them, like what is being done, and how can we talk to people to educate them that indigenous people have always been here? I mean, we get that, we kind of accept that, but what is being done, and what can we do to help you in that?
Stephanie, would you like to say?
So I don't know of any NGOs working in that area, but I can tell you that there are 4 federally recognized tribes in Arizona whose traditional lands straddle the U.S.-Mexican border. There are 2 in Texas and 18 in California. So that gives you an idea of what Father here is talking about. I didn't catch your name, sorry. Okay. So Indigenous America predated the U.S.-Mexican border, obviously, and that's not even bringing into the conversation the northern border of the U.S. either, which has similar aspects. So that argument about this isn't even their country, I don't know about that. Thank you for a question. It's a good one.
I can just add really quickly. I think there's been in recent years much more sensitivity and understanding in federal court in particular as to the existence of indigenous languages, specifically with more people coming from that we see here from Guatemala, for instance, or southern Mexico. And so I think there's a greater degree of sensitivity. I don't know to what extent, but it is something that people watch for a lot more.
And if I may add, as a mother of a child who is in 7th grade, there's a lot that our kids don't learn in school. They don't learn. And so I think we have, for someone who does the kind of work that you do, be aware that these people were never privileged to have the quality education that they deserve to understand the origins of their own country,
I have a question. Whether there's, I have a question. Trying to get us to end perhaps on a more hopeful note. Demographics are changing in the United States, and white majority is very soon in the entire country no longer be the white majority. We already have a number of states that are close to I think it's called minority-majority situation, and so I'm wondering what will it take? What does it take to shift public awareness for the fact that this country is so much more heterogeneous than it is in the imagination of a lot of people, and also hopefully, with that, an appreciation of multilingualism, of bilingualism, of multiculturalism, and perhaps a different understanding of what individualism means, right? Because if we are invoking individual rights to de facto bolster a very particular type of culture, then that is also contradiction of the whole notion of individual rights. And if those individual rights could be expanded to understand the diversity, the true diversity of the country, then that would be obviously a shift. But what does it take? When can it happen? What should we be advocating for? And I would like to hear also from Rodney, perhaps as a political scientist.
Yeah, I guess, I do have some data actually from Arizona that speaks to this to some degree, at least in terms of values and beliefs. I've done some survey work, and one of the questions we asked, because I've been very interested in this, because my perception is that people who have an anti-Latino attitude is because they believe they don't share American values, blah, blah, blah. Well, in the survey, we asked the question, can you get ahead with hard work? Do you have individual responsibility for doing well? Latinos score very high on this. Very high on this. In fact, depending on the survey, the time, place, and so on, they score higher than the non-Latino white population. But we also ask them another question, is that government should help those who try to help themselves but still need help, something like that. And they also score very high on that. So we think there's kind of a unique kind of humanitarian orientation and a somewhat unique individualism that are both very consistent with I shouldn't use the word central in this case, core American values. And it would be wonderful, I think, if somehow that word got out but you hear this a lot, you see this a lot, but somehow it doesn't penetrate to those who are unwilling to listen or don't want to be informed about these kinds of things. But there's lots of evidence to suggest that in terms of the mass public, they're actually, not that different, maybe stronger. There's a certain uniqueness to their views that we've been kind of, interested to see. And then if you look at, Latinos who do hold public offices and so on, in many ways, it's kind of a ground up kind of way. In fact, a term that was used at the very outset about whether we talk about assimilation or integration, political scientists often use the term political incorporation. That is, they're part of it and so on. Another term that has been used that some people I've worked with is the notion of neo-assimilation, a new kind of assimilation. That is, you can be assimilated, but you can have strong links to your cultural background and strong links to what are thought to be American values. They're not mutually exclusive. And I think that is so often overlooked or underappreciated. And somehow getting the word out, having that, that kind of evidence portrayed publicly, the more it's done, I think it would be very helpful in various kinds of ways.
Hey, Dr. Berman, can I just answer that in a fun way real quick? So this is a sign of optimism, hope. We asked refugees questions, the group I have them, is there any questions that you have after we've done the welcome? And a very frequent question is, have you tried any American food, or what do you think of American food? Then there's usually the uncomfortable with the silence, somebody will try to fill in the blank. Like pizza, like tacos, Chinese food. So very clearly, the food is integrated, and let's hope the people aren't too far behind.
Do we have time for one more question, or because it's right up against the time, right? I don't want to get everybody late for.
Thank you. It's a very short question. Where do you see technology? Is this a blessing or a curse? What are the do's and don'ts? Automatic translation, video conferencing, the implementation and adoption of technology wholesale as a result of the pandemic, and also of technological advance in schools, in the courts, in hospitals, and so on.
Sure, I can address that. It scares me a little bit, honestly, Jaime, because I think the sort of mediated world that we're living in is in some senses it brings us together, but in others it separates us as well. So my worry, and I actually had written that down as a note for today as well, that this sort of with COVID and video teleconferencing becoming sort of a thing of that we just take for granted, I'm concerned. I am worried that we are losing we could lose the personal touch. At the same time, it enables us to do things like having the Zapoteco three-way mediated translation, but at least maybe they're a little bit more present in that hearing. Or actually, they will be more present in that hearing than if they were hearing Spanish. It's, I like it, but I don't like it also.
I will share from the elementary point of view that technology has been a blessing. Many of our students come with skills that they don't even know they have. And then once we put an iPad in front of them and we teach them the basics, they run with it, and they're teaching and taking over the smartboard in some classrooms. And their coding abilities is phenomenal, and they're teaching each other. And so it becomes kind of a universal language, just like music, right? And so as long as it's used appropriately and used for in the right modalities, we definitely can use it as a blessing. We also partner with PCs for Refugees through ASU, and they are fabulous with providing technology for our parents. So in our parent nights, we make sure to make technology as a part of that so that they can learn how to do an application online, for a job interview, or to, access things that education. We do English classes online for our parents as well if they're unable to come out or do not have transportation. So I feel like it just depends on what avenue and the way that we use technology. But definitely have skills that that our children possess that we are learning from them. So.
Well, I want to thank everybody for all the incredible comments and thoughts that were shared here. Thanks everybody in the audience for your interest, participation, great questions, and thank you, Glenn and Nina, for inviting me to moderate this. I always learn a lot when I'm with smart people, so I appreciate all of you here and all the work that you do. Thank you very much. Thank you all.